Good evening, class. We're going to spend a few minutes tonight talking about Chapter 11 and talking about imperfect competition. But before we do, we're going to go back and do just a little bit of research on Chapter 10, where we talked about a monopoly. Talked about the aspects of it, compared it to perfect competition. But just want to quickly just kind of run through because um, in Chapter 11, run through about a monopoly because in Chapter 11 they do refer back to perfect competition and monopolistic competition, and um, I think we've been over perfect competition enough to have a pretty good grasp on it, but maybe not on the side of monopoly. And if you look at the market for a monopolist, if you remember, there was one seller, there was barriers to entry, and you had a bunch of buyers. So from a market perspective, a monopolist is, the only game in town. The 800-pound gorilla. They're going to dictate. Uh, as far as demand and marginal revenue, the market demand curve for a monopolist is downward sloping. The marginal revenue curve, you remember talking about it, lies below the demand curve and actually has twice the slope as a demand curve. So if you're looking at the vertical and the horizontal axis of the model that economists use, at that point, demand and marginal revenue both start out at the same point on the vertical axis. Demand curve comes down and cuts the horizontal axis as a point. Marginal revenue curve comes down also at a slope that's twice as steep as the market demand curve, and it cuts that horizontal axis halfway between the origin and the point where the market demand curve intersects it or cuts it. When we come to price, it's pretty straightforward on a monopolist. Price is going to be greater than marginal cost, and that's because monopolists are price setters. Again, only game in town, 800-pound gorilla. They're going to determine what their price point is. If we look at profit maximization, they produce at a quantity of Q with the subscript M, if you go back and look at your text. And that's that point where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And then they take and they find that point at the point of quantity, Q with subscript of M, on the horizontal axis. They read from that point vertically straight up to find the point that corresponds to it on the demand curve. Then they read straight over to the vertical axis. And at that point, they determine what the price is. So you're going to look at price in the textbook, and it's going to be P with the subscript M. It's going to be Q with the subscript M. That's equilibrium price and quantity that a monopolist would set. If you look at profit, because of barriers to entry, economic profit is capable in the long run. Remember, when we talked about perfect competition, we were talking about maybe economic profits in the short run or economic losses in the short run, but you have additional firms because there are no barriers to entry. You have additional firms coming in and they are competing the profits down until the economic profit equals zero. If the economic profit's at a loss, you're going to have firms that are going to exit, and they will continue exiting until the price rises enough so that economic profit, comes back to the zero point. And then lastly, from an efficiency perspective, and this is why that government, officials, public policy, policy regulators, depending on what kind of terminology you want to use, it's the efficiency aspect of a monopolistic market is what concerns them the most. The efficiency aspect from a social efficiency or social standpoint. Equilibrium solution is inefficient. And why is it inefficient? If it were efficient, marginal revenue would equal marginal cost. In this case, price would equal marginal cost. But from a monopolistic perspective, price is greater than marginal cost. So from a societal perspective, it's going to be an inefficient solution, let's call it, because typically a monopolist will produce too fewer units and it will sell those units at a higher price. And so from a consumer's perspective or from society's perspective, it's just not a very efficient way to do business. So that's going to bring us up, that's going to review the aspect of a monopolistic market that we learned in chapter 10. And so keep some of these aspects in mind as we launch into the world of imperfect competition. And the definition that the authors provide us for imperfect competition, it's a market structure with more than one firm where at least one firm has market power. Remember, monopolist, one firm generated a lot of market power, and that helped constitute or helped create those barriers to entry. If you think about the perfect competition market, definitely more than one. There were more, multiple, or I guess the text called them many buyers and sellers, right? But no firm had market power. Everybody was a price taker. In a pure competitive market, you're a price taker. In a monopolistic market, you're a price setter. We're going to find out what the situation is as we work through these examples of imperfect competition. First one they talk about is monopolistic competition, which is basically they talk about its competition among the many. And the definitions as they walk through for monopolistic competition, there are many sellers. Remember, many sellers. Reminds you a little of perfect competition. Each seller produces a product that is similar to the product of others, but not identical. The products are differentiated. Remember, perfect competition, everything was homogeneous product. Here, they're not exactly what you would call close substitutes. They're not identical. They are slightly differentiated. And entry and exit into the market is easy. So if you're thinking about a comparison between monopolistic competition and perfect competition, both markets have many sellers, at least by definition, many sellers. I don't think a monopolistic competition probably has the number of sellers that a pure competition does, but again, text says many sellers. Where in entry and exit is relatively easy in a monopolistic competition, as was in the perfect competition. Where they differ and where it's maybe a little similar to a monopolistic market is the products aren't homogeneous. They're not exactly close substitutes. They're not identical. There are some characteristics that differentiates one market or one product from another. And the reason that you, me, any other consumer might be willing to pay more in a monopolistic competitive market is the products may be substitutes, but not perfect substitutes. Think about cell phone. Think about cable. Think about automobiles. I mean, they could be substitutes, but they're not perfect substitutes. Product differentiation gives existing firms some degree of market power. I mean, you've got, I don't know how many producers of cell phones, but, a lot of people will, they're looking at probably, the two types. You've got, an Apple phone, an iPhone, and you've got an Android maybe. Probably some other types. You still have some flip phones and some other types of phones. But while they are similar in that they use they have a similar technology because they're all cell phones, they're highly differentiated. And availability of close substitutes is going to drive the demand of any particular product in a highly elastic because you can raise the price, but you can't raise it much because the products are differentiated to some extent, because you're also operating in that highly elastic end of the market demand. You can move the price a little, but you can't drive it up or down a whole lot. And where some of the examples they gave you in the text for monopolistic competition at colleges. A lot of colleges have business school, biology, chemistry, science, so you kind of lump sciences, may have philosophy, may have education. Think about hairstylists. I'm not that much into hairstylists, but as far as I'm concerned, there's not a whole lot of difference from one hairstylist to the other. They at least the ones I've been around, they dress kind of funky and a little on the kind of that out there kind of mentality. But there's not a lot of difference between one hairstylist, at least from my perspective, not a lot of difference from one hairstylist to the next as far as cutting somebody's hair. Think about lawyers. Lawyers may specialize, contract law, criminal law, different kinds of types of law. But when it comes right down to it, you get into those sub-markets, and there's not a lot of difference. Banks, auto repair, convenience stores. Think about your local convenience stores. I'm thinking about, if you're in Atlanta, I've got 7-Eleven, I've got Racetrack, I've got QT. To me, they sell gasoline, but they're also a convenience store. And one of the things that helps drive this market power for a firm that's in monopolistic competition, producers can create real differences. Producers create the perception of differences. So producers can either create real differences in the product, or through advertising or some other means, they can create the perception of differences. Advertising gives the impression of real difference, and it helps to create brand loyalty. Firms exploit the market power differentiation creates. Think about going to the grocery store, and you're at Walmart or wherever you do your shopping, or maybe it's Costco or Sam's Club or BJ's. It doesn't matter, but wherever you do your, and say you go to the store and you're looking for bottled water, and you'll go back to the bottled water area, and there's, I don't know, at least at Costco and Sam's Club, you've probably got 8 or 10 different kinds of bottled water. If you go to a Walmart or something, you've got more than that. Think about potato chips. Think about laundry detergent. What's the real difference between Tide and Cheer and, I don't know, some of the other laundry detergents? Depends on who makes them. If let's say they were manufactured by Procter and Gamble, may not be any difference between Cheer and Tide other than the perfume that they add to it and the color of the detergent. They may all wash clothes the same, and you'll have individuals that'll swear, it's not out of the ordinary to see people, they will only buy Tide or they'll only buy Cheer, and it's developed brand loyalty. Same thing with bottled water, Evian. First thing you ask on bottled water, do you want gas or no gas? And if you say you want gas, you've got what, Pellegrino. I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but you've got about 2 or 3 types of gaseous type bottled water. If you don't want gas, you've got, I don't know, Deer Park, Arrowhead. You've got some upper end. You've got Evian. So you've got a lot of different choices to make. And again, what do we talk about? Economics, it's the study of choice. So you've got a lot of choices when you go to the grocery store, and a lot of it is based on product differentiation. Product maximization for these firms can set their own price within limits. Again, you can play around with price a little because of differentiation. It's the notion of a single market. Price is meaningless. Um, it's not, I'm not sure that um, in the notion of, when they talk about the notion of a single market, um, price is somewhat meaningless because you're going to set your own price. Here, there's a little wiggle room on the price, but because you're operating in that upper end of that elastic demand, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room. And again, remember, as with the monopolistic market, the market demand curve is downward sloping. In the short run, the downward sloping demand curve, but a bit more elastic because of close substitutes. More elastic than the monopolistic market. So because of close substitutes, that demand curve is a little more elastic. The firm demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost, and average total cost are the factors that are going to drive in the short run, the factors that are going to drive decisions that these firms make. The marginal revenue, as with monopolistic market, it's got twice the slope of the demand curve. So price is going to be greater than marginal revenue. They set it at marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, just like the monopolistic market does. They set Q, then they read up to the demand curve, they set and go over to the vertical, and they set P. Economic profits are calculated in this market as price minus average total cost. So that gets you a unit profit. So the price minus the average total cost, that'll get you a per unit price or per unit profit. You multiply that by the quantity that you have derived, that the firm has derived on the horizontal axis, and that gets an economic profit. There will be some dead weight loss because price is greater than marginal cost. In the long run, few firms will enter the market, and the short run profit will be competed away. So you have to be careful. Firms have to be careful when it comes to the short run profit and the long run profit because they don't want to compete it away. There are some barriers to entry because of brand power and loyalty, but there's not the strength of the barriers to entry that you have with the monopolistic market. Remember, when we talked about the factors of monopolistic competition, we said it's, easy entry and exit. Same thing we had with perfect competition. As new firms enter, availability of substitutes increase. Make sense? Remember, somewhere in the text, and I can't remember where I saw it in the text, they talk about entrepreneurs and talk about that entrepreneurs just like a bloodhound. They can smell a profit margin or a profit opportunity, and they're going to enter the market until there is no longer economic profit, and then they're going to turn around and leave the market. And so monopolistic competition is similar to perfect competition in that while you have some brand loyalty, it's easy for firms to enter and leave the market. And then when they're talking about availability of substitutes and substitutes increasing, it reduces the demand for product, and the demand curve shifts to the left because of the substitutes. The demand for product becomes more elastic, and not only does it shift to the left, but the demand curve, so it's not hardly steep, it tends to flatten. What did the market demand curve look like in perfect competition? It was horizontal, right? Remember? Horizontal demand curve. Twice the slope, marginal revenue of your marginal revenue curve. And as more firms come in, the demand curve starts to shift down to the left, and it starts to flatten a little. And as it starts to flatten a little, the marginal revenue curve is going to start to flatten a little because it's going to be twice the slope of the market demand curve. Entry does nothing to a firm's cost. So remember, similar to a perfect competition, firms enter the market. It's just going to compete the price down. It's not going to really impact the firm's cost. The long run equilibrium is a firm must be maximizing profit where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Economic profit is competed or driven to zero. Price equals average total cost, so it's just covering the opportunity cost. And then they talk a few minutes about entry and exit are typically monopolistic competition based on economic profit equal to zero. Remember, profit greater than zero, what's happening? Firms coming in. Economic profit less than zero, what's happening? Firms hitting the road. They're leaving the market. Excess capacity, and they talk about now the price of variety. In perfect competition, the firm demand curve equal marginal revenue equal price. Remember, flat. Marginal cost equal marginal revenue equals long run average cost. That's in, remember, we talked about in perfect competition. Monopolistic competition, marginal cost equal marginal revenue. Price equals long run average cost, but here price is greater than marginal cost. And in the monopolistic competition, firms are operating with excess capacity. Remember, what was it that governments or public policy didn't like about a monopolistic market? They didn't produce at maximum output. They also charge prices that, higher prices than, at least in public policy's mind, that should have been charged to the consumer. When they're operating at excess capacity, it's a situation in which a firm operates to the left of the lowest point on its average total cost curve. Long run average costs are higher, more resources, higher price. That drives that price greater than marginal cost, and you end up with a deadweight loss. That's going to wrap this segment up. When we come back, we're going to talk about oligopoly. And it's competition among the few. It's a little different take on imperfect competition, but that's what we'll talk about when we come back in the second segment. Talk to everybody in a few minutes.